In this episode of Stemiverse, Marcus and I talk with Ben Newsome. Ben is the founder of Fizzics Education, a company that specializes in delivering interactive science workshops and shows. Through Fizzics Education, Ben reaches around 300,000 children each year in person or via video conference in Australia or around the world. Ben is a qualified science teacher and a former environmental consultant, a children's summer camp director and a CSIRO Education Team member. Ben is the recipient of the 2013 Northern District's Education Centre in Sydney, Winston Churchill Fellowship. He's on the leadership team for the International Society for Technology in Education Interactive Video Conferencing Group. He's an ambassador for the Association of Science Education Technicians in New South Wales, a part of the Education Advisory Committee for the GWS Giants AFL team, and a co-founder of the two non-profit museum collaborative networks, Visual Excursions Australia and the Pinnacle Education Collaborative. Wow, what a resume. This is Stemiverse episode 9. Welcome to Stemiverse, the podcast that helps educators become awesome at teaching STEM, be it at home or in the classroom. I am Peter Dalmaris, and with my co-host Marcus Sharpie, our mission is to bring you the experiences of educators, students and stakeholders who strive every day to make the teaching and learning of science, technology, engineering, mathematics and art better. Ben, thank you very much for joining us on Stemiverse. It's a great privilege to have you on. I met you a few, 6-7 weeks ago at an event where we just happened, both of us, to be there. And I know that you are the founder of Fizzics Education, which I'd like to ask you questions about. It looks like a great company. You do physics, science in general, teaching to kids around Australia. You've got a huge audience of 300,000 plus children that participate in your various programs every year. That's massive. I'm very impressed. But I've seen some other items in your CV which are very impressive. So I can see here that you are, an ambassador for the Association of Science Education Technicians in New South Wales. It's a nice big title. You have the Winston Churchill Fellowship as well, and a few other bits and pieces. So would you like to take the next few minutes and tell us a little bit about your background and kind of, in a nutshell, what led you to where you are today in teaching science?
Sure. And thanks very much, guys, for having me along. Obviously, it was great meeting you 7 weeks ago at that event. And when you asked me what's led me to do this, oh gosh, I don't even know what's in some ways actually started me off down this old journey thing. But look, I'm a science teacher. So trained as a science teacher, was teaching in Western Sydney schools. And I was lucky enough to come into, at that time, the CSIRO Education outreach team. They were running some fantastic programs on, I think it was scientific method off the top of my head. And what I knew is that I kind of wanted to do something that wasn't traditional teaching. Loved teaching, had a lot of good time with the students and fellow teachers and everything else. But I kind of wanted to play with the fun stuff.
Yep.
Like the best way to describe it. And so teaching a lot of fun things. Sorry, mate?
So you must be a geek.
Yeah, to be honest, I just figured I just want to do a bit of playing. For me, like all teachers, especially in the science space, the best times are when you're doing science experiments, the worst times when you're sitting in front of a textbook. So I didn't want to do that. And obviously teaching within a school, I'd be able to impact several thousand lives very well from year 8 to year 12. But I kind of really entered teaching because I wanted to make a genuine impact as far as I could about teaching about how the world actually works. So when I saw the CSIRO team come around, I thought I really want to do this because you could visit different schools day by day and show experiments, and kids have fun, and you get them wired and ready to go, and then teachers could then follow on and use those examples in their traditional teaching. So I started working with them for a couple of years, running programs, whether it's forensics or whatever. But towards the end of a couple of years with them, I really felt I wanted to unbox myself. Like really just go, let's just do something myself and enter the wilderness that is small business in some ways, but purely because I just wanted to have just the freedom to create. And so for me, we started off doing kids' science parties. Most of the schools we visited were actually remote schools. We would, it's funny I say we, there was very much a plural royal we. It was definitely only me at the time, where I just shoved some stuff in a box, put it in the back of a vehicle and drive out as far as a bitumen would take me into Western New South Wales and teach kids at multiple towns until I ran out of petrol. So
what year was that? Just to get a time frame, when about was that? How long ago was that?
So we started. So I started physics in 2004, and we went for a good year or two. We really were on the fringes of STEM education. Nobody really knew who we were, what we did, and why would we care about this mob that can't spell properly. So those people are wondering, is physics spelled Fizzics? Because why not? Anyway, so a lot of the programs we ran were remote schools because a number of places were just so busy, the traditional outreach places from universities and things, just were so booked up that to leave a metropolitan area, it would be rare at best. So you just needed a crazy person like myself, just jump in a car and just drive. So wind this forward over time, we did more and more programs, and now this day we see nearly 500 schools a year, something like that. We've got staff in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra, and we teach globally via video conference, which certainly keeps us busy and keeps me with a lack of sleep, but it's good fun.
Yes, time frames must be
yeah.
particularly difficult.
So when you were starting out, how did you get the schools to accept this crazy guy who would just rock up and teach, the fun side of science? How did you reach out to the schools and get them to go, okay, this is not some weirdo, this is actually a respected teacher or educator? Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get started?
Long, hard road and poor skills in marketing because I'm not a teacher. I just wanted to teach kids. And so for me, I was more interested about being true to how science works and how teaching works, and respected what it's like within a school where you get thrown lots of different ideas from outside vendors, and I didn't want to be that place that just sold to people. I just wanted to be a place that would do good stuff, and if we do good programs, people are going to let people know about it. So that's why we had a very slow but sure and steady growth, because I think our very first gig was in front of it was a Bankstown council actually, and at a sustainability festival. So we had about 10 schools or something rotating around different providers around sustainability and the environment. And I was one of them, running a renewable energy program, pretty straightforward, solar, wind and all that type of stuff. And so one of those schools said, hey, that was cool. Can you come and do stuff with our other grade? And I said, I guess I can. And came to the school, ran the program, and they kind of told someone else that, I don't know, this was before really social media was really running properly. So I don't know, maybe they emailed each other or something. But it was just a very slow burn. The reason we're doing remote schools wasn't just because people had contended time to be able to get out to these schools. It was also because this was in the middle of the time when New South Wales had a country areas programs funding, where they had over roughly 240 schools who would they were under federal funds, but they were specifically to get enrichment activities out to their places. And I was lucky enough to present. I didn't realise, as a usual deal, I'm fairly naive about these things. I was presenting in the show, and it turns out one of the science consultants was in front of the show and said, "Hey, would you like to come out to my region?" Sure. So all of a sudden we're touring around Nyngan and Burke and Western New South Wales. We remote and kids and Indigenous communities. And then that information started to fill sort of back to the city slowly. And we went from there. So, yeah, a long road, but certainly it wasn't from sending stuff out to schools and say, hey, book us. It was simply just through word of mouth. And in a lot of ways, it's still to this day.
Yeah, you did the kilometers. Now, obviously, the spelling of your company's name, Fizzics with a Z,
yeah, I was a C grade,
right?
I was a C grade student in English, C plus occasionally.
Well, that's pretty good. Better than me, actually. But it is kind of quirky, right? So does that reflect on the way that you deliver your science lessons?
Yeah, that's a thing. I've actually had people ask me about this going, we've got a quirky name, and why aren't you wearing the fancy lab coat that's been tie-dyed? Where's the weird hair and whatever? But I mean, maybe there's actually a disconnect actually with our name and what we actually do. But the presentation style is I actually want to be true to the scientists. So very rarely will scientists actually wear lab coats, and you only wear lab coats if you need to protect yourself. In a lot of ways, they're in the way. And if you're an astronomer, why are you wearing a lab coat? If you're a scuba diver, that's like the worst thing ever. So I didn't want to go down the quirky side. I didn't want to dress up as a scientist because I wanted to say, actually, I used to work as a scientist before I was a teacher. I used to work as an environmental consultant. So I didn't want to produce a caricature that's not real. And as for the quirkiness, I don't know. I figure that it's just a slightly fun, slightly playful like we do work with kids in a way that tries to engage them. But the pedigree of the company is still a lot of us are science teachers or museum educators, science communicators, and we kind of try and be real to the science and real to the industry that is science communication. I think that it is cool. There are a lot of places, and there's probably some, even for, I know there might be some listeners to your podcast who are science communicators in their own thing. But I do know from feedback from teachers that dressing up and being the wild, wacky science magician, when you ask the students what they have perceived from their lesson, what happened, they'll tell you it was magic. It was it's not what you want to do. I mean, magicians have a place. They do a fantastic job at, deceiving us. But science is about sharing knowledge, not hiding it. And I use the science to sell the substance. If that helps.
Awesome. So you just try to be authentic. That's what it really was about, because the authenticity in science it has the potential to draw people in it. It can be real and still very, very interesting and very exciting. You don't need to masquerade yourself as a clown, right?
Yeah, that's it. And so you actually look at our website nowadays, I mean, it really is quite muted. When you actually we've got our title there because we're somewhat committed now to our name. But when you even look at the title, we strip back a lot of there's a bit of playfulness within the logo slightly, but it really is just a beaker, and we're interested about how the world works, hence the structure of the atom is sort of going around it, even though we know full well that's not what an atom looks like. But the idea is that we really are more about the science, and the experiments themselves will more than grab a student than crazy hair and slime everywhere.
Great. Let's concentrate on science then. So I would like to talk about your book. So You recently published a book. I think it was published in 2017 early. Is that right?
Yeah, very early. Yeah.
So it's called Be Amazing, How to Teach Science the Way Primary Kids Love.
So I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
I guess the first question I'd like to know is, why did you write the book?
I got a bee in my bonnet. I don't know. We run so many programs to schools, and we do a lot of professional development workshops as well. And just one evening, and literally this is how my head works, but April or May last year, I just kind of thought, I keep on repeating myself so often about certain things in these workshops, and teachers love to hear about how to teach science in a certain way that will grab kids' attention. And I thought, this is fantastic, but what if I miss a sentence or two, or whatever I'm saying in a particular workshop? What if I just write this stuff down? And so that if we're running a session and someone wants to really do a deep dive into how kids learn science, not so much about curriculum dot points, it's not really about that, just literally it's what kids are thinking about when they walk into your classroom, how to set up your classroom so they might even care about the science you're about to teach. how to get your lessons so it actually teaches variables and the scientific method, so it actually looks after the science properly. And then once you've got that bit done, how can you engage others, not just your own classroom, but your fellow grade, your entire school, or maybe even reach it further out into your local community and really start engaging people about how the world works beyond that. So I just started typing, and suddenly
a few months
it got
later
published. That's probably the best way to describe it.
So would you say that this is a collection of lessons that perhaps you learned in your career as a teacher and as a scientist, a distillation of what works and what doesn't, and how to get the most out of a session with students?
Yep.
That's what's in the book, right?
That's pretty much. So, I didn't want to be yet another 101 experiments book. Like, there's so many of those in libraries, and they've got their place. One day we'll probably write one, I guess, but we'll probably have teacher blackline masters, which will help them do more stuff than just, hey, let's pour vinegar and bicarb together. It's more about the practice of how kids will learn science well. So we look at their misconceptions about what they're bringing into the room, and you'd be amazed. There's like half a chapter or something, just a whole bunch of dot points of what kids actually believe heat does, light does, sound does.
What the clouds are like, for example, white rains. There's not holes in the clouds where the water is coming out of, right? That's a common misconception.
It looks like I just made this stuff up. Perhaps I should have this book in front of me, but those things, I just sat down one evening and tried to brainstorm all the weird and wild things I had heard or my staff had heard whilst presenting science. Every one of those dot points are real. So, and actually there was a story put into the book about this. One of our staff at work, I don't want to go too far into it because we promised that her mother wouldn't be forever unnamed. But you know who she is. Hello, how you doing? She was talking to her granddaughter, and the granddaughter put her hand up in the air and pointed at this thing in the sky and said, Grandma, what is this? And Grandma didn't know what this thing was. And my good friend of mine, one of our really strong, close associates at work, said, what are you talking about, Grandma? That's the moon. And Grandma said, no, it's not the moon because it's day. The moon doesn't come out during the day.
Yes. Wow.
Now, you have to understand that this woman, she's a smart woman, but at 55 years old, she's still not realized that the moon can come out during the day. And so it kind of got me thinking, wow, we're in such a great position, not just as science communicators, like someone that does what I do, but teachers in general have this ability to create or destroy misconceptions. And I think that's fantastic. What a perfect position where you can set kids up to be able to know how the world really works. But on the flip side, that means you need to know how the world works. So it means you can create an issue where kids generally believe something because they experience it and now their teacher says it. So that's an interesting part. So yeah, we do throw there in Be Amazing. There are a number of experiments quickly described for people to sink their teeth into a maker event or something. But I'm really more about trying to bury into what a kid is actually thinking and doing and how teachers can help them work better in the classroom.
Yeah. So the story that you just mentioned, that's in the first chapter titled Understanding the Students. So this is a chapter, I suppose, written to help teachers understand the students, knowing what kind of misconceptions students might be bringing from home, for example, helps you to address them, right? And I guess there are very good discussion opportunities. So let's kind of like what Mythbusters do on TV. Okay, there's this misconception that there's this false belief. Let's analyze it and let's see what's behind it and try to reach the reality of the matter.
Well, it is. I think there's a picture in the book. I saw it in a school in Western Sydney. It was simply titled, "What is Heat?" And so what the teacher had done is a really simple way to get their lesson, pumping, was they gave the kids a whole bunch of Post-it notes and they got them to write down, what do you think heat is? Simple, right? And so you then pop them on the board and then they could then start rearranging in different ways. I can't remember exactly what this picture looks like, but I had to take a photo of it and I had a chat with the teacher going, that is brilliant what you're doing because you're really grabbing straight away, the kids' attention about what they think they know about it is, they can then say what they'd like to know and what don't they know. And that means they could tailor their lesson according to their students' needs. And that's brilliant. And so simple. I mean, a pack of Post-it notes, that ain't that much.
Mm-hmm. And that's really an example of learning by doing as well, because the kids now have to think about, what do I think? Probably they've never thought of this before until the teacher asked them, what do you think hate is? And then they had to actually sit down and try hard and think about it and write down the Post-it notes. And that was actually, that activity made them realize the misconceptions. Because when the teacher explained what hate really is, that process of going from the false to the right to the correct probably stuck with them. It's something that they will remember for a long time. It's part of the method of science, of self-correcting. Amazing.
Yeah, it's a good way to go. I mean, it doesn't have to be just about science anyway. I mean, there'll be people here that teach history, art, and maths, and whatever else. It's the whole saying, know your audience. Who are these people? What do they know? What do they care about? What can we do to add value? And that's a good way to start a lesson.
Awesome. So the second chapter in your book is called Priming the Classroom. How do you do that?
I guess it was sort of like, when you walk into a room, I remember when I was doing student teacher days, my master teacher was very big on this. And the idea was that having something that's on the desk or hanging from the ceiling or whatever you're going to do, something that grabs attention straight away, that the kids straight away know that they're walking into something that's just not magical, but something special. They're going to have something interesting to look at, and they can start formulating in their head, what does this lesson be about? Let's be honest, they're not all perfect academic students. I wasn't one of them either. I'd be going there wild like every other kid. But if there's something kind of interesting in the classroom, inevitably, even if they're in year 9 or year 4, it doesn't matter. If you've got something cool on the desk, it obviously grabs their attention to some degree. And so priming the classroom was written around that idea of what can you do in your classroom, how can you set it up that will help students to at least engage with what you're about to do.
So it's a stimulus, right? It draws your attention. Can you give us an example of what would you use in a classroom, for example?
Now, I get the advantage of having kind of cool stuff hanging around, right? So I must say this is unfair, but I mean, obviously I could say beakers and bits and pieces, but I mean, that's pretty predictable in a high school lab. What isn't predictable is a mannequin with a shirt on it with kind of like oozing pretend blood off it and crime scene tape around it, and you're about to talk about a forensics lab. That's going to grab attention. Now, of course, you have to be very careful about this. I must say, as a caveat, be aware of your students' backgrounds because there may be some issues here behind it, but that will grab attention. I absolutely guarantee it. They know full well that this is a different day, that you've set up a pretend crime scene and you've sprung it on them. I guarantee they'll listen, at least for the first 5 minutes. It's then up to your delivery from there.
I have to ask, have you ever set up a crime scene and then only realized about students passed after the fact?
It's a fair question. No, I haven't. So what we actually do when we run a forensics program, the teachers will let us know, because I mean, that's the thing, like we reach 300,000 students a year. We're not going to know the individual needs of each student. But we have very clear discussion with the teachers saying, look, you have a choice. We can run it around a genuine, bad murder scene or whatever. But of course, if you don't want to go down that route, we can simply slightly tweak it and run a session around who stole the parrot. Right. Seriously, I kid you not. So who stole the parrot? So it's got the same stations, it's got the same blood types and everything else. But in this case, the robber stole, they cut themselves on the cage as I was taking the $50,000 bird away. It's a ridiculous story, but it allows us to still fit it in without freaking the kids out. So
there are many ways to skin the cat.
I suppose you could have a bird cage with little bits of feathers around, and if you have little bits of blood there, it might freak them out, and I think maybe you actually have done something bad with an animal. You've got to watch that. But look, it's a fair question. I know it's a bit odd, but there'll be teachers, there'll be people listening to this podcast who know full well that they've set up a lesson with full intention of a great day, and it's just gone pear-shaped. And I could see you got to sort of do your homework a little bit.
Yeah. Plan up front, know your audience. Again, it goes back to chapter number 1, understand the students and what they will tolerate or not. So, yeah. Let's move on to chapter 3. So that looks like a big one, actually, because you talk about teaching tactics. So you go through a variety of things here that a teacher can use as far as the way that they present information or they go about a lesson. You include STEM Pitch Fest, for example, as one tactic. Could you explain that?
Now that's a sort of a fun one we designed once because we had to come up with something that would grab some gifted and talented Year 10 students, and they didn't. At the time, the school didn't want us to just run a program where it was just, here's the science, now see you later. What they wanted to do was have the students create something during half their day. So it was actually a specialised program. It's not on our website. It's just something we just ran as an ad hoc thing. So create something during half the day, but then go into a pitch fest like Shark Tank or Dragon Den type environment where we had a pretend panel, and the kids would have to pitch in like 3 minutes why their thing they've created is great, what its use is, why the world needs it now. and the whole idea is that the class would then vote so that, and actually, by the way, they weren't voting then and there, so the kids got embarrassed that they got no votes. It was all done silently. But the idea is that we're just trying to get through the kids that science doesn't exist by itself. It's a discipline that's interconnected with all other industries. And there's science for the classic what is the nature of the universe, Big Bang type theory stuff. But quite a lot of science is connected to the industry whereby it produces a cool new innovation in a product or material or whatever. So what I was trying to get through to the kids is that STEM, the E in STEM, the engineering, the one that often can get a little bit missed, is you have to solve a problem giving limited time and limited resources. But just because you can create said contraption doesn't mean the world wants it. So I was trying to mesh it all together in kind of a weird businessy thing. Kids have a lot of fun with it. And so that particular chapter around creating a pitch fest was just a playful way of trying to bring the real world into a lesson. And I've had some good feedback from some teachers that it can work quite well.
You've also got a section on establishing a makerspace and I guess joining the maker movement. Why do you think that is important?
The makerspace, I mean, that's got a real roll on. I mean, it's been going for a while now, for the last few years. But if people haven't heard what the maker movement is, it's simply just how can we repurpose goods in a different way to solve a different problem or a new problem. So often you see weird and wacky, pulled apart technological bits that get shoved onto cardboard and wood and whatever to solve. Often weird contraptions, but the reason why we are makerspaces, I suggest, as an idea in schools, is that it allows kids to explore their creativity. So the idea being that, look, your majority of your lessons they're not formulaic, but you've got a very set outcome within a set given time. But wouldn't it just be cool if you've got a spare room in your school? Now, let's be honest, not all schools have a spare room, so maybe you have a maker cupboard. But the idea being that if you can have a space where kids can have an ongoing project, whether it goes for several weeks or a month or, hey, even a year, it doesn't really matter. If there's something where kids can spend time building in their lunch hour, I mean, let's be honest, it's a glorified version of a chess club. It just happens to be with materials, right? So obviously got supervisory issues and make sure there's safety involved and things. But I mean, the maker movement allows to put the science, the technology, the engineering, the arts and the mathematics, so STEAM, all together where kids create a project in the set time and set materials. And it's not as prescriptive. The kid comes up with it. So that's why I like them. They are getting a lot of press these days. I mean, I know, hey, when it was, it's pretty big when the White House has a maker movement sort of thing.
Yes.
But fundamentally, it's just kids putting stuff together and what happens.
So to get a makerspace in your school, what would be the minimal investment, I suppose, by the school? Is it the space, a few desks, any materials? I
just wonder, how would you go about creating a makerspace?
It's all about budget, eventually. It comes down to budget and your reticence to expose kids to risk. It might be an interesting way to say this. So obviously, if you're going to put something like this, I mean, don't go gung-ho yourself and then get yourself in trouble with your school board or whatever. You don't need that hassle. So make sure that your executive's on board, and if you're one of the executives, fantastic, off you go. But in terms of it, it just comes down to budget. What are you prepared to have to get? Now, you don't have to get fancy stuff. You don't have to go and buy brand new materials and craft materials and new motors. And I mean, you see some maker spaces where they've got 3D printers and all kinds of cool stuff. That's for the people with a budget. If you haven't got much of a budget, repurpose old things that are getting thrown out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know. I mean, at least in Australian cities, I mean, I know these podcasts are global, so I'm not sure what happens elsewhere, but certainly around where I live in Sydney, you have these tip collection days and people just put stuff out on the streets.
Yes,
now, here's the thing, though. You've got to know what you're collecting, though, because seeing that we are doing a STEM podcast and considering your guys' background, yes, capacitors are concerning and they do store charge and they do release charge pretty fast. So I would suggest not creating TV tubes. It's not a good idea. But there are some things like old video players, they get thrown out all the time. And you can open that up and get little motors and all sorts of bits and pieces. And I know it doesn't have to be even offcuts from your woodwork or metalwork place. Get tools from garage sales. But it just comes down to, if the kids are going to go into this space, no matter how big it is that there's got to be some form of induction process. Here is the thing. Here's how to use the thing so it doesn't hurt your thing. That's probably the best way to describe it. Yeah, if that helps. From there, I mean, it just comes down to budgetary constraints.
Yeah. So the barrier to entry is not as high as a lot of people might think. A lot of the materials can actually be donated or found for free. And as long as you have somebody there to help out the kids with those initial steps, some orientation, you're good to go.
So let's say you have the budget. How would you leverage technology?
Yeah, and that's the biggie, isn't it? There's so many things you can do. I mean, isn't there an app for everything? But look, the ones that you often see these days, you often see 3D printers, which means there are a number of apps that will connect with your 3D printer. We're a big fan of Maker's Empire, though there are others around.
What is Maker's Empire?
Maker's Empire. So Maker's Empire, it's a crew out of Adelaide who are now running programs in China and New York. We do a little bit of work with them on a program as well, whereby it's a piece of software where kids can create figures and buildings and cool stuff in a 3D environment, so manipulating blobs and bits to shove together in a software environment. And they can send those files to a 3D printer and have it printed. So what's cool about it doesn't have to be just, hey, let's just make a figurine, now we're over it, let's not use it. You can use these 3D printers to solve a problem. I know that on their site there's a video where they posed a challenge, and I believe it was upper primary. I may get this wrong, but I think it was upper primary, where the kids had to design in their head what a prosthetic arm would do. How would it work? So obviously it's a big challenge, and kids had to work on that for quite a while, but the kids could see there's not just hey, let's just make a random thing because my teacher's making me. The idea was to have them try and create a solution using a simple device. So to answer your question about technology, I mean, technology is, everyone often thinks digital, and it's so tempting to say there's digital stuff right now. But effectively, technology has been around since the wheel got invented. So any simple machine that does stuff is technically technology. So I would obviously have soldering irons and all sorts of stuff that can just support the building of the thing. I would suggest, just advice, is don't just get the thing because it's shiny.
Yes.
We're probably a little bit we like a shiny thing here at work at Fizzics as well. But there's got to be a need, especially if you're spending big money on shiny things. You want to be able to use them a lot.
So what are the shiny things you like?
Well, it's kind of, I mean, often you see people amalgamate Lego robotics or a robotics something into their device or whatever they're going to do. But mind you, the Lego has its place. I mean, if there's any Lego executives that like your product, we use it. But there's you can use Arduino, Raspberry Pi. You can use smaller stuff to create similar effects. It's just and I keep on harkening back to a budget, but it just comes down to get the thing that you can afford and that the kids are going to consistently use. If they don't know how to use it, I must say I've seen a number of schools buy cool things, and then they sit in the cupboard, especially when the teacher who did the time to learn the thing transfers to a new school. And that can be an issue.
So are you seeing like a consistent trend of certain things ending up in the cupboard?
Yeah, well, it's not because they get locked in. It's because you might get a teacher's really right into this maker thing. And so, I mean, what can often happen with these maker spaces is that one or two teachers are like, this is my thing. I'm all over this. This is going to be the thing I get to do. And they're right into it. They know so much stuff about what the kids are designing, and they get right into it. But inevitably, they either transfer or they retire. And unless they've trained their fellow teachers around how to use some of this stuff, the kids move on, because let's be honest, these kids with tech these days, they usually know more than teachers. They know more than me. They scare me. So you let them basically run the lesson because it's their free time in lots of ways. But once those kids graduate, and if you haven't trained other kids on how to do stuff, you then got this potential of you set up a situation where you've invested in this tech, whatever that tech might be. And if the people then leave, you've then got a cupboard filled with cool stuff, which over time becomes outdated, so it's not supported anymore, or kids aren't even aware it even exists. And the number of times I've seen things just being thrown out that are perfectly fine, they're just 15 years old and no one knows how to use them anymore.
Yep. So it's good to go for something classic that has a larger base in terms of people with the necessary expertise to make use of them, instead of, as you said, the latest and greatest shiny object that hits your attention. But in some cases, you actually don't need any technology to teach technology, right? So I'm looking here at chapter 4. You talk about robotics, teaching robotics without robots. Can you tell us about that?
The reason I put teaching robotics without robotics, I wrote that there because I was looking at the chapter and thought, I was trying to imagine a school in Africa, northern Canada, somewhere where they're just in the middle of nowhere and may not have much budget. How on earth can you teach procedural thinking without the stuff if you haven't got the fancy stuff? And then I'm talking, this is ridiculous. I've tried to write it as if we didn't have straws or whatever. So rather than just writing, I went out to a class and went, let's try and pretend how we teach robotics. How do robots work, period? And so we're using our arms and our legs to say, program me to walk across the room and sit on a chair. And it's actually incredibly hard.
It's very hard
to describe what you've got to do to actually move and then sit down. Now, yeah, let's be honest. It wasn't a fantastic robotics lesson because they didn't get to touch a robot. But my gosh, that grabbed kids' brains going just to try to get their head around how to move an ankle and the knee at the right time. I did a lot of falling down that lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez. The wrong instruction does not compute.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the rest of that
Reboot.
chapter is just a couple of different robots around. I mean, there's a lot of other ones that exist. And I mean, I think I mentioned B-bots, Blue-bots, Lego robotics, but it's only because, hey, we use them a lot, so I've got a bit of experience with them. I mean, there's heaps of robotics platforms. When it comes down to this type of computational thinking, it's just, if I do this, what will happen? If I do this, what will happen? If I don't do any of it, what will happen? It's just how do the ones and zeros flow in your code?
That's great. Yeah, I tried that technique as well a very long time ago, and I had similar results. But I had some safety protocols as well, so that I wouldn't bump against doors or fall down the stairs.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff. Like, it doesn't even have to be seriously, getting you to walk across the room and sit down can be difficult. You can even get them to get them to understand spatial awareness in a robot. It's really hard. Get them to say, make me pick up this apple.
Yes.
So sitting at the desk, as simple as that. And them trying to even understand from their eyes where your hand is in relation to the apple is difficult because I said, you must tell me distances. You must tell me angles. Like I was just, you can be really quite mean about it.
Would they come around with a measuring tape to measure those distances, or would they just try and judge you?
I agree. You're right. We totally should do that next time. because I mean, what it does though, it sets the kids up to actually understand how robots think. And so when they start learning the programs, it's better because, look, there's a lot of drag and drop code programs around. And they're fantastic, but I kind of wonder, it's like, let's put the pretty picture here and it does this, as opposed to what does the pretty picture actually do within the robot? And understanding that part's actually far more critical than moving pretty pictures around on a screen.
Yeah.
So you've got a section here on social media and I guess education as well. That sounds a little bit dangerous to me when you think about kids and social media.
Yes,
Snapchat, yes.
Yeah, it is. And so that was a bit of a thing. I sort of wondered, do I do it? Do I not? What do we do? So you'll actually find, you've got the early iteration of this book. So we've actually written a different version because it involves Vine. So we've actually changed it into an Instagram space. So what you do is you have to protect your kids. There are rules around social media and children and what they can and can't do. So social media is inherently about communicating between people. So there are platforms, edgy blogs and CSIRO and other things, where you can protect kids within a safe environment for them to upload videos and pictures and describe their whatever. So yes, you can do around get kids to blog about their experiences, describe it to others, so that rather than just writing up a project in their science book to be marked by the teacher, does your thing. Is your experiment, are you actually really describing what truly occurs so someone can repeat it? I mean, you could actually challenge kids. I'm just making stuff up here right now, guys, but you could challenge kids whereby you could have, all right, you can do this experiment and this half of the room will do this experiment. You're going to write it up and now you're going to use each other's procedures to repeat the experiment again. So that's just social media itself. I mean, there's a bit of concern around exposing kids to social media, but my headspace around this is it exists anyway. They will use it anyway, and even if they're underage, some of the kids will create pseudonyms and set themselves up anyway. So I feel within the caveats and safety of your school policy and everything else is run it within protected environments and at least introduce them around the safety around using social media. And if you're using ones which are more publicly viewable, whether you're posting pictures, like I know there's a whole bunch of people who follow us, like classrooms in Ireland and America who follow our Twitter feed or Instagram, where it's literally their class. It says Mr. Steve's class. And you can see these kids' pictures or whatnot. So obviously the parents are giving permission for the kids to be involved. But all the kids do is they submit their videos and their pictures or their ideas to their teacher. The teacher moderates it and then sends it out into the big wide world. But what this does is taking them out of a private space, and of course you got them, again, I'm going to underline again, make it safe and everything else so that no one gets in trouble. If you can show even just your local community what you're doing in your classroom, it's not this hidden environment which people don't understand what you're doing in the room. They can see the value that schools add to kids' education, and kids can communicate about what they love and what they don't love. And so that's at least on one side of it, yeah.
It's very similar, like in the old days, like when I was a student, I was supposed to write a report for a particular assignment, for example, and that report would go to my teacher. He would be the only person to read it, give me a mark. Now, that is extremely limited. All this work just went to one person. I got a mark and maybe a bit of feedback, and that's it. But what you're proposing here, using social media as a way to get kids to document the work that they do and then share it with a lot of people, potentially with billions of people, and potentially, again, receive feedback from all these people. There is a tremendous value in that. I think it's very compatible with maker education as well, and considering that all the safety issues are dealt with for children, I think that that's also part of the scientific method, where what you do gets documented, shared with other people who can criticize it, perhaps reproduce your experiment or whatever you build, and then learn through that collaborative process. So there's a lot of value in that. if done properly and moderated.
Yeah, and it goes very far. I mean, it's pretty hard to look on Facebook these days without seeing a teacher saying, "I want to prove to my students how far things go." There's a good friend of mine who, so I sit on a few different boards, and one of them, this bloke from South Korea, regularly every year does this thing with Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley is a book that some people might know, and he gets Flat Stanley. He sends it out to his friends like myself in Australia, got friends in South Africa and America and South America, and he gets us to all print out Flat Stanley and then takes Flat Stanley around and show pictures of Flat Stanley going around the place, and kids just get an idea that with one email, one post. And he primes us all, right? He says, "Hey, by the way, we're going to do this, soon." Start feeding it in so that kids can just see what happens, and they see how very quickly this information gets shared around. But yeah, within that chapter, though, I believe I also talked about Slack and Trello as well as a social media thing too. I mean, I know it's kind of odd to say that Slack and Trello are social media because traditionally most people think of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and everything else. But again, because social is about discussions. I'm very interested about trying to get rid of roadblocks to learning. So I looked at Trello. If people aren't aware of what Trello is, it's a project management app, basically. So think of a whole bunch of Post-it notes on the table where you get to write up whatever's got to get done onto different Post-it notes, and you arrange them in order, a bit like a Pinterest board. And so it's kind of useful. So for me, you could think about this. This is a good collaborative place, even just if it's done within your own classroom, where kids could then work on shared projects, who's in charge of what, when are the due dates, add attachments of files, photos, and checklists. It's really neat and useful. And if you wanted to, within a protected shared environment, you could invite parents. Some teachers may not want to invite parents. It's totally up to you. But it just means that it's a social space and a project board. And what I like about this is, let's ignore the science just for a little bit. In the real world, project-based learning, which is, we all heard about PBL a lot. Yeah. That happens in business, industry. A fish and chip shop needs to organise getting stuff in. It doesn't matter. It's a good skill to have, irrespective of the science. Same thing with Slack. Slack is a communications tool, and it's exploded around the world. But I wrote it from a point of how it could be useful in a teaching environment, where I think of it just when I was teaching. My email box was filled with clutter and spam, and it wasn't just so much spam. Like, it was within intra-organizational communications that could have simply been a text or not a long-winded email, but you had to pre-sort that email. So I thought, why not write about that so that people could see how Slack could be useful, that people could pre-sort their messages for you before you even look at them.
It's a very unusual topic in an education book. I haven't seen any of that being discussed in other books, so that's just a very useful chapter that you've got there. But that also ties really well with chapter number 6, engaging the community. So you're publishing out all this good work in the various social media, and but you also have, I suppose, more down-to-earth, real-life means of engaging the community, right? Can you give us a couple of examples of that, of how to engage the community?
Of course. So the traditional way is a science fair. Everyone loves a science fair, and everyone's school hall or open space can easily be converted into something that works. Traditionally, it's kids showing off their wares. What have they been learning? What have they done? But I wanted to take that to another level, where we did we were often involved in a multitude of different festivals and things around National Science Week, which happens in the middle of August every year in Australia, and undoubtedly other countries have other versions as well. But I got to see one really work, whereby the science fair got done down the middle of a street in the Hunter Valley north of Sydney, whereby the teachers were guided by a resident scientist, so a local environmental scientist, to contact and work with local businesses, cafes, barbershops, the whole thing, right down the street of Dungog in New South Wales, where they would give up a little bit of their space for a child to put their student desk and their experiment in their shop or whatever they're doing. And the public could see what the kids were doing. And so it was fun. It was kind of cool, because when you think about it, of course you want to do a science fair in your home, in your school, but inevitably the only people who turn up are the parents who have the kids in the first place. If you run this stuff down your school, down the actual main street, and of course you want to have your local council or whatever your government body is on side so they don't freak out. But the businesses who participated, their feedback was fantastic because they were getting foot traffic. They were getting people buying their ice creams. They were getting people buying whatever it is there was in their room. They were being seen as pillars of their community because they're doing a community event. The students loved it because they got to show off. I mean, what kid doesn't want to show off? The school gets to show off and effectively say, look how cool our students are for doing these bits. And by organising the local town hall, they're able to run meet a scientist, do lectures with the local environment officers. It was a great thing. So yeah, I mean, engaging the community can be low key, or it can be a bit bigger. My world is not just doing science festivals, but the community is not just who you can see face to face, but like this podcast, we're meeting over Skype. I've seen festivals that are rolling on a 24-hour day where you see every time zone coming up with kids connect in a safe spot. And they learn about what they've been doing in their world. They often have like a theme. Like the last one was around World Water Day. And the kids were doing experiments and learning about the importance of clean and fresh water and actually water science of pH and this, whatever. But kids around the world were just following this time frame going around. And that's still a community event, but it's global.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
That's amazing. How would you suggest that a school begins their engagement with the community so that they learn the ropes as opposed to going straight to what you just recommended, like a rolling time, global 24-hour event? It's probably kind of hard to begin with. What would be the easiest way to get started?
Baby steps. Don't bite off too much. And this is the problem too. Like I also know, of course we run so many professional development programs. It can be easy to freak people out with stuff like that. And I get that. Because I was freaked out about it when I first heard about these things too. But it's kind of like the more you get exposed to it and try a little bit with a little bit of risk, but not too bad, you can get closer and closer to running these larger events. But I'd say small scale. Start something in your school. Like firstly, get your executive happy and ready to go to run a science event in your school, whatever it might be.
How do you do that? How do you make the powers that be happy, and how do you, I guess, get them to see your point of view and get them engaged in what you're trying to achieve?
It sounds like politics, doesn't it?
It does. Probably is.
And some people might be nodding their head as they walk their dog or drive their car right now. But obviously, every school has its own dynamic, and we full know well. And as outreach professionals, we see different dynamics in the same schools. Like this, you think the school around the corner is the same. It's not. They're often different. So there's going to be personalities involved, but it comes down to if you just say, let's just say worst case, right? Your school doesn't want to get involved for whatever reason, perceptions of risk, or don't want to put their head out of the shell, whatever it is that they don't want to do. You can run something in your own classroom and have your grades visit.
There you go.
Start small. I mean, if you get the little wins to happen so that people get comfortable that it is possible, and then maybe make it a little bit bigger the next year. I mean, I always like the long view, that some of these events I've seen have grown from something very small. I mean, a non-profit co-founded with Australian Museum and Sydney Opera House and a few others called Virtual Excursions Australia, started off with three of us sitting around at a conference in Cairns in 2012 saying, I wish that all the virtual excursions providers, so people who did distance education via video conference, just spoke with each other on a regular basis and told each other what you do, what we've learned and all that type of stuff. And that grew from, 4 or 5 museums to 40 in Australia, all sharing knowledge in various different ways, and grew a large community who would want to connect with these places. And I was lucky enough to do a Churchill Fellowship on science education video conferencing, where I went to North America and saw 26 museums doing their own thing. And I said the same thing to them at ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education Conference. I asked them, so look, this idea of collaborative work has worked in Australia. Why don't you do it in North America? So now there's another group over there called the Pinnacle Education Collaborative. It's the same thing as like 25 museums or whoever it is, all working together to start to create events that work together. Now, they started from nothing, absolutely nothing, but they grew. And they grew because we had a bit of audacity. We said, stuff it, let's do it.
Mm-hmm. That's the humble beginnings. Great things happening.
And I believe you could do that within a school. If your executive is not keen, start in your own classroom. Get a paired partner. Find a Skype partner. I mean, it doesn't have to be over the top, but you can grow things from something quite small.
Yeah, awesome. So Be Amazing. I'm talking about your book.
Yeah,
as well.
I think it's a great book for anybody who's thinking of any of what we discussed to get started and get some really amazing and practical ideas. So highly recommended. So for the next few minutes, me and Marcus would like to ask you a few quick questions. Very practical things. For example, we'd like to know if there's a particular person, either historical or still living, or if somebody you knew personally or not, that has influenced the way that you teach, your teaching philosophy.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing, isn't it? There's so many people that you could be influenced by it. And I kind of I started thinking about this and started actually putting some quotes together, and it's sitting on our site, and you see these quotes around. So there's actually probably not one. There's quite a few. So for me, in terms of influences, I like the headspace that Elon Musk has with the idea of just let's just make things happen irrespective of what people have to say. I mean, there's a quote that says, "Rockets are cool. There is no getting around that." It's very true.
Yes.
There's another quote. Robert Heinlein wrote one, which is, "Everything is theoretically impossible until it is done." Carl Sagan, "Valid criticism does you a favor." There's so many. So I couldn't just say one person. I mean, I'm not really. It sounds like a quotes person, but it's like the idea of just cause it's so now doesn't mean it has to be so later, if that helps.
Absolutely, yeah. They were great quotes, by the way.
Yeah, awesome.
We'll include them in the show notes. In your teaching, do you have any applications that help you manage 300,000 students?
Apps.
Apps that you can't live without? How do you organize yourself?
Trello, I'm guessing.
Is it Trello?
Trello is one, Slack's another. I would suggest coffee. Lots of coffee. No, I have a fantastic team who supports me, and that's the thing. So there's no I mean, there's probably someone around somewhere in the world who's doing something with not that number by themselves. I'm not sure how they're doing it unless they're on TV or something. I've got a fantastic team, and again, it grew from nothing. So we have fantastic office support staff. We've got educators who have come from a variety of science museums across Australia. They're highly creative. They want to help design and build things. And our headspace is, again, just because we're at our current size doesn't mean it can't grow, because fundamentally we just want to get kids to know what the world's about. And if that means we have to grow, well, so be it. So it comes down to systems. I mean, eventually, if this, then what?
Yes.
So you use a scientific method to operate.
Yeah, probably. I suspect so, with a dash of craziness.
Very good. So how do you hire educators? What do you look for?
Yeah, so how we look for them. Actually, these days we get approached. And that's a fantastic position to be in. Mind you, we need more staff in Brisbane, by the way. That's a side note.
Anybody?
No, just we always need more staff. But the people, LinkedIn's one. We'll put out a thing on LinkedIn or put something on Facebook. We used to use a lot of job advertising platforms, but it's such a specialised gig, such a specialised role as science communicator, that it's effectively more about the industry knowing that you're advertising. So I put a quick blurb out, and there's some people who follow us on Twitter and bits and pieces. So they usually go, "Oh, wow, they're hiring again." And so we get this flood of applications, and we get like this drip feed that happens. Like we usually get an application about once a week. And so it's then just trying to work out, well, what's our current needs now? And we want to make sure that the role fits them as well. And so that's sort of.
And what do you look for?
Bit of excitement. And I almost sounded very droll, didn't I? I just want. It's really painful. It's almost like when you watch X Factor and people are singers and whatnot. There's this particular personality which is hard to pin down, but you can just tell and know that they could handle 1,000 people in the room and a TV camera on them. Or they can handle a bunch of year 7s going nuts. They can handle a whole bunch of 5-year-olds in a kid's science party. Personable, likable, pragmatic, a little bit excitable, but not to the point of where their brains aren't functioning properly. Just people who are curious. It's kind of a tough gig. Teaching's a difficult gig where you do this training, but eventually you're in front of these kids where you just got to have to make it work. But at the same point and flip point, I've met a number of people who are highly qualified, but sitting in a room of 5 meters by 5 meters, I swear I couldn't hear them. I couldn't. There was no presence, and so I'm looking for people that really, really want to make a difference, and it just shines through. I don't know how to describe it. It's just that's probably the best way.
So it seems to me that you're looking for particular personalities, enthusiastic personalities out there, kind of personalities pleasant to people more than specific skills, right?
Yeah, the skills can be taught. Mm-hmm. I know that's a bit odd to say, but obviously, fundamentally they need to have a science background to some degree. A number of our staff have masters and PhDs in various areas, but the science is fine and it's good and gives you a background to be able to answer the questions correctly and all that. But if you are boring people, you probably have no business in this work, and there's maybe something else that you're better suited for. It's not because you're a bad person. It's just simply the audience partly is there to learn, but let's be honest, they're also there to be entertained.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it does come down to that fine line, and we don't always get it right, but we get close.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap it up here, but I'd like to ask you, I'm sure that our listeners would like to get in touch with you.
Sure.
They probably have a lot of questions. Maybe they want to engage you for doing something with them at their schools. How can they do that? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure, there's a few different ways. So firstly, we can't spell. So if you type in physics, spelled Fizzics Education. Now, by the way, as a heads up, there is another company called Fizzics, which is a beer keg. Awesome. you will find those guys too. So if you type in the education after physics, you will find us into your favorite search platform. You will find our website. That's physicseducation.com.au. There's more than enough information there. Me personally, a couple of different ways. Twitter is a good way. Ben Newsome, so BN, then NEWSOME with an underscore. You'll find us there. Or just go to the Fizzics Ed Twitter page or Facebook channel. Just type in Fizzics Education and just type in Twitter, Facebook, and all the rest. You will find us, and you'll certainly be able to have a chat with us, and we'll be able to help you out. Love to have a chat.
We'll have all that in the show notes.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
It was amazing. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks very much, guys, for having me on. Have a great afternoon.
Cheers. You too, mate.
Take care. That's all for this episode. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to our email address, questions@stemiverse.com, and we'd be happy to answer them. Do you want us to interview someone in particular? Let us know. Visit us at stemiverse.com to get the show notes of every episode. And subscribe on iTunes by searching for the name of our podcast, Stemiverse. That is STEMIVERSE. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.